Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack a really fascinating psychological ladder of human values. We're looking at a progression of virtues that fundamentally shape our society, our governance, and honestly, our daily interactions with one another. If you've ever wondered why some people or institutions seem so deeply connected to the needs of others, while some just remain coldly distant, well, the source material we're exploring today maps this out perfectly. We're going to trace this journey from the absolute baseline of human coexistence, all the way up to the highest peak of selfless action. To truly grasp these concepts, we're going to climb a conceptual ladder together. We'll start with the foundation of tolerance, move through the transition from apathy to empathy, explore compassion as the ultimate action, apply these ideas to civil service, and finally, look at practical ways to cultivate compassion. All right, starting with step 1, the foundation of tolerance, the prerequisite for a civilized society. Now, tolerance isn't just about begrudgingly putting up with things you don't like. It's defined as a permissive attitude towards differing opinions, practices, races, or religions. It's basically the capacity to endure diversity in our environment. But why does this matter so much? Well, because tolerance is what upholds the human right to a dignified life and the rule of law. If you think about the inverse, any form of injustice inflicted on someone else is a reflection of intolerance. Intolerance crushes free thinking, it promotes violence, and is literally the reflection of narrow-mindedness. So tolerance is the absolute baseline for civilized living and social progress. You know that famous Voltaire quote, "I disagree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it." It perfectly captures the essence of enduring differing viewpoints. And this historical weight of tolerance is so critical that the great philosophers recognized it as a core pillar of society. Plato called it temperance, designating it as one of the 4 cardinal virtues, and Aristotle referred to it as the golden mean. The big takeaway here is that empathy and compassion cannot even exist if this baseline of tolerance isn't met first. Our source material points to historical examples of this in action, like Jawaharlal Nehru, who demonstrated profound tolerance for criticism. After the Indochina War, his own ministers heavily criticized him in parliament, but instead of reacting defensively, he actually listened to them and acknowledged their critiques. This shows exactly why tolerance is vital, especially for civil servants and leaders. To be impartial, objective, and nonpartisan, you have to be tolerant. I mean, you can't treat everyone equally if you aren't. In fact, it's considered a constitutional obligation inherent in secularism in Article 19, requiring leaders to tolerate entirely different viewpoints to build essential social capital. Moving on to step 2, from apathy to empathy, where we look at understanding human reactions to distress. When faced with distress, humans generally exhibit 4 related but very distinct psychological reactions. Using the relatable example of a road accident, we can easily distinguish between these commonly confused states. First is apathy, pure indifference. You see the accident, you ignore it, maybe you just shrug and say, well, happens every day. There's zero emotion. Next up is sympathy, an act of kindness. You notice the accident and say, oh wow, that's so sad. You recognize it, sure, but from a distance. Then we step up to empathy, which is about experience. You see the accident, you actually feel the pain, you might cry, and you actively ask people to help because you're emotionally experiencing that victim's trauma. And finally, compassion, which is all about action. You call the ambulance yourself and make sure the victim gets to the hospital. Now, if we look closely at the gulf between those middle steps, sympathy and empathy, we realize there is a massive difference. Sympathy is an instinctive, momentary reaction. It's a spontaneous burst of kindness, but a real deep understanding of the problem isn't actually there. Empathy, on the other hand, involves putting yourself directly in another person's shoes to truly understand their pain. It engages both our cognitive and our emotional faculties. Because you understand the nature and the intensity of the problem, empathy is far more sustainable and creates a much deeper relationship. So empathy is a much stronger attitude and a way better indicator of how someone is actually going to behave. Which brings us to step 3, compassion, the ultimate action, moving from just feeling to helping. So having compassion means taking that deep empathetic understanding of another's pain and pairing it with a strong desire to actually do something about it. The emphasis here is entirely on action. It requires you to put the other person first, deeply imagine what they're going through, and then actively execute ways to help them. Empathy feels the pain. Compassion works to stop it. Think about Mother Teresa for a second. It wasn't just sympathy or empathy that caused her to leave her motherland and dedicate her life to selfless service in Kolkata. It was compassion. It was this irresistible drive to take physical action to alleviate the suffering she saw firsthand. It is, without a doubt, the most powerful force on this ladder of virtues.
Let's apply this to the real world in step 4, empathy in civil service, and why intelligence just isn't enough. The source material illustrates this stark contrast by looking at the historical British Indian Civil Service, or ICS. Now, the ICS attracted incredibly intelligent youth, yet they consistently failed to look after the interests of everyday citizens. Why? Because while they were undeniably smart, they completely lacked empathy. Their manuals lacked any directives for it. Their sole goal was securing the administrative and economic interests of the empire. Unfortunately, modern bureaucracies sometimes inherit this colonial legacy. That is exactly why modern administration desperately requires empathetic officers, leaders like Alex Palmenin or Hirsch Mander, to ensure inclusive growth. Raw intelligence simply isn't enough if you don't understand the suffering of the people you're supposed to serve. In developing nations especially, there is a constant, looming danger of a disconnect between the bureaucracy and the public. Bureaucrats are highly vulnerable to getting trapped in the distancing, insulated confines of the power elite. Without empathy, policymakers write rules without having a clue about the real-world brunt borne by the citizens. Plus, if citizens experience an administration as apathetic, they literally stop asking for help. But with empathy, leaders can bridge that gap, understand the enduring nature of distress, and actually motivate common people to reach out and utilize public services.
Finally, step 5, how to cultivate compassion. Let's look at some practical steps to build that empathy muscle. See, empathy isn't just an inherent trait you're either born with or you're not. It's a muscle we can consciously train. And the source outlines some highly practical steps for this. First, engaging with art, literature, and cinema, like Satyajit Ray's Pather Panchali, which so realistically portrays poverty, can profoundly inculcate empathy. Second, actively participating in common holidays across different religions, like Eid or Diwali, builds shared cultural understanding. Third, engaging in deliberate perspective-taking. Things like visiting slums or old-age homes forces you to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And structurally, this is exactly why IAS probationers are sent on Bharat Darshan, a grand tour of the country, to directly experience the incredible diversity of the nation and purposefully grow their compassion for others. As we wrap up this explainer, we've climbed from the basic necessity of tolerance, recognized the differences between apathy, sympathy, and empathy, and arrived at the ultimate goal: compassionate action. So I want you to look at your own place on this ladder, consider the situations in your own community, and ask yourself this final, crucial question. When faced with suffering, are you just watching, or are you acting?